Okay, so for Module 3, we'll be talking about ethical and legal issues in assessment. These are very important to know so that you don't get yourself or your company into any kind of trouble. And so it's important to know relevant laws, and these are just a few of them that are involved in Equal Employment Opportunity, or EEO. So Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, if you've been a college student for a while, you might know Title IX of the Civil Rights Act, which has to do with non-discrimination as particularly based on gender in a educational setting. Title VII is the work equivalent of that. We have the Age Discrimination in Employment Act. Don't want to discriminate based on age in either direction. We have the Americans with Disabilities Act, and then the Amendments Act that followed that. So this is not discriminating based on any sort of physical or mental disability. And there are some caveats to that. There's the Civil Rights Act of 1991, and there was an executive order on affirmative action. So there are some current legal issues that we always need to consider in doing any kind of testing, whether it's in the workplace or in other environments. But in particular for workplace assessment, we need to be thinking about identification of the assessments properly, ethically, legally, and causation. So what do we think this information is going to tell us about an employee? And what will be the result of this information we get from this assessment? What will it cause? Will it cause this person to get hired or not hired? Will it cause them to get fired or promoted or not promoted? We need to be aware. We need to think about job relatedness and business necessity. Can we prove that these are the things we're looking at? And we need to ponder valid alternatives with a less adverse impact if that's possible. So we need to think about pre-employment inquiries. What are we asking and why? But then we also, in light of the ADA, need to think about reasonable accommodations. If we're giving people a set amount of time to do something and they say, well, I actually need more time, we should give them that, right? We should be considering the accommodations as need be. So in diversity, we need to consider every step of the way. Diversity, I should say, has been shown in study after study in psychology to improve efficacy, creativeness, collaboration, not getting stuck in a rut. And so it really is beneficial to businesses to have diverse workforces. So we should consider a recruitment strategy. How might that be soliciting a diverse pool or not, right? Where are we advertising? What is the ad saying? One example is we know that women often only apply to a job if they meet every single criteria or exceed it, whereas men might be more inclined to apply if they meet about half the criteria, right? So are all these criteria actually necessary? Selection of system content and selection implementation, right? So how are we selecting people? How is that implemented? Table 35.1 here in your book gives a really nice description of some of these aspects of diversity. Now, one of the things that's sort of on the other side of, we'll talk a lot about hiring this semester, but we can also be involved, and assessment can also be involved in downsizing or reducing workforce. So there are different ways cuts can happen. Vertical cuts would be just cutting entire business units. I'm going to give you some examples from Virginia Wesleyan because I've worked there 16 years, so it's what I know most intimately. Outsourcing is a key example here. So the employees who do buildings and grounds. So our housekeepers, our groundskeepers, they have been outsourced to a different company rather than being employed by Virginia Wesleyan. Horizontal cuts. This would be where you would reduce pretty much every department, or at least across the board, often by a certain number of employees, that's a goal, or a percentage of employees within each department. I've seen this happen since I've been at Virginia Wesleyan, where a lot of staff members were cut. And that led to, as you can imagine, some inefficiencies within departments. Early retirement incentives, where you would give the folks who've been there the longest incentive to retire, because oftentimes those are your folks who are being paid the most, because in theory they've been getting raises over the years, right? And so you can incentivize those people to retire. And you can focus on hiring in a particular age range at that point. And then natural attrition. Sometimes people will just retire on their own, decide to go into another field, move to another corporation, move physically. And then what can happen is you just don't replace those positions. As you can imagine, that can cause some issues because now you have everybody else doing the work that they've been assigned plus the work of this eliminated position. Now, there are a lot of ethical guidelines that people should be looking at when you're doing assessments in these contexts. So the American Psychological Association has ethical principles of psychologists and a code of conduct, regardless of, what your level of training, what your setting. These guide psychologists throughout. The Society for Industrial Organizational Psychology, which is a division of APA, has the principles of the use and validation of employee selection procedures. So these guide how to ethically do that. And then there are standards for educational and psychological testing that also govern assessment in particular. So if you're going to be using assessments, whether it's in the hiring process or at any other point through an employee's career, you need to be thinking about these questions. Who's going to do the assessment, right? Who will actually conduct it? Where will the assessment take place? Do you have a physical space those people need to come to? What equipment will be used? Is it paper and pencil? Does it require specific technology? Can it be done on a tablet or a computer? Who will give feedback on those assessments? You can't just do an assessment and then have that number sit there, right? Who's going to interpret that? Who's going to give the person responsible for making these decisions that feedback? How will those accommodations we've already mentioned be considered? Who is going to actually score these and how? Is there an automated system or will someone need to sit down and actually calculate everything? How will tests and results be stored to ensure test security and assessee security? So one of the ethical obligations of people working in the psychological field is test security, to make sure tests are not leaked so that people can't cheat on them. And then how will those scores be presented and to whom? So there's module 3. Thanks so much for listening and hope you're enjoying the course so far.